How's everyone? Good. Very good. Very good. After the whole day on a Thursday, everyone's saying good. Doesn't sound right. Anyway, yeah, you're lying. I didn't call you liar. I'm saying you're lying. You're perfectly fine in the gym. You're comfortable. Yes. All right. My name is Rajesh Mathur. I'm the organizer of this meetup, and I work for a consulting company called PM Partners. So that's my side. This is Tony. Tony is
Agile Delivery Manager here at
Pager. So, and Dan is our speaker tonight. One of us is called.
One till you hear it.
Yeah, that will change things. Yeah. So we finalized this meetup. We logged it down in August because we discussed the topic, and I loved it so much. I said, let's finalize this date and this meetup. I want to hear it, and it was an amazing, powerful message there. So we will wait for it. But Tony, thanks for hosting this, and appreciate the food, all the fattening food and drinks.
Absolute pleasure.
But thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome to you all. It's great to be able to host you here at PageUp. So for those of you that don't know who PageUp are, so we're a cloud-based unified talent management platform, software as a service. We have over 300 customers based in 190 countries. So we're 21 years young this month. So we leverage lean and agile practices in our product development. It's predominantly done here in Melbourne. So we're very pleased to be hosting this talk. It's a very relevant topic for us. So although we don't have any delivery leadership roles on at the moment, we do have a bunch of other ones. So here's our careers page. And if you want to have a chat with me or any of the other PageUp people, if you're interested, please let me know. So toilets, fire escapes through the door. The alert tones and procedures are pretty standard. So enough from me. Over to Dan. What you told me you want to leave.
This is the first test. Okay, we're in business. So my name's Dan. I work as an Agile consultant and coach. Who's in the Agile kind of biz? Just a nice and high hands, right? Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Tony. Thank you to Rajesh for inviting me, to Tony and PageUp for hosting. And who's doing something like lean? Maybe if not Agile. Yeah. Oh, hi, Tony. So I've got some of my friends. And I'll try, these words Agile and lean are new to you? Good. Okay, I'll try and make it accessible. I'm trying to make it intuitive. But today, I haven't actually put Agile or Lean in the title because it's more general than that. It's more about continuous improvement and how we scale. So this is a big picture of me. I'm sort of dual affiliated with ZenX Machina and Skillfire. We can talk about all that. And there's a bit of self-promotion, but let's... don't worry about that. Let's just judge things on their merits. So I just want to talk a little bit before I get into the body of scaling improvement about what improvement and continuous improvement looks like at small scale. I understand that much of the emphasis of this talk is about delivery, and delivery is important. We all understand that. I hope. So by delivery, I mean doing our jobs, delivering something of value to our customers, products, services, and so forth. But that's just one side. The other side is improving, getting better. And we live in such a dynamic, competitive world. Things are getting faster, that if you just concentrate on delivering, then you fall into that trap of working harder, not smarter, and eventually you just burn out. So last year I tried to explain that like this in terms of the so-called Agile trap, but this could be, you could apply this to Lean, Kanban, any improvement process that does some good up front, you get a bit of a boost. And so let's talk about the road to Agile hell, or it could be Lean hell if you like. So we get some kind of boost, but suddenly things have become a bit easier. We could do 10 to 30% more work. So we go, beauty, let's do 10 to 30% more work. And so the reward for more work, for getting better and faster and more efficient and even more effective is more work, which leads to burnout. You lose that original performance boost eventually, and you're kind of worse off than you were before. I've heard people describe this as Tetris, Agile Tetris, where it might be that you had a project structure where it took a while to spin up projects and people had a bit of time, and then they worked really, really hard, and then it would spin down, and they'd have some natural gap in between. And one of the things you can do if you misapply some basic Agile practices like Scrum and Kanban now is you squeeze out that gap at the start and the finish, so you've got continuous work. But we're human beings rather than cogs in the machine. So again, at a small scale, what I think we should be doing, and what's worked for me and others, is that when you get that initial uplift because you've made some kind of improvement, you want to reserve some capacity for more improvement and figure out what that is that you need to improve. Could be UX, automation, more agile. It sort of depends on your context. If you're not, if you're in some other field than the home ground of Agile in software development and IT, then improvement will mean something else. You then get more uplift and you go round and round this virtuous circle. That's the idea. It sort of sounds like a perpetual motion machine. Eventually, you'll kind of stop. But does that make sense to you? And yeah, this is making sense. Now, if you can't do that, then, you know, I don't really care if you're putting sticky notes on the wall or what your mindset is. This is the improvement side. So that's sort of my definition of Agile done right. Here's another one for automation and DevOps. And the circle can start in different places. One is you need a bit of slack in your system. You can't just have people working hard, delivering the whole time. They need to be able to see opportunities for improvement. Then they do something good, quality improves, they automate some stuff. So by automating in this context, the machines or the software or the robots take off some of the load, that they tend to be more reliable, that frees up more time, and you again you go round and round in this virtuous circle. So when I started doing Agile, I thought this was, which was in a software development context, I thought this kind of improvement and balancing improvement and delivery, this was for small, smart teams. This is back as an early adopter in the early noughties, and not so much for the larger organizations. But when I looked up in 2010, there was interest. And I thought, ooh, that's because the world is getting faster, more competitive, and approaches like Agile and Lean promise this kind of compounding improvement, kind of like compound interest. But then I had a bit of a crisis. So this is sort of this is my personal side, the existential crisis of, am I making a real difference when I go into a really big organization and try and help? And now we turn to this idea of, can we really scale improvement? So who has heard of this gentleman before? Eliyahu Goldratt. So theory of constraints. This is sort of what I think of as the Israeli cousin of Lean. He died a few years ago, but had some very good insights, popularized in Australia by James Ross, who introduced me and many others to his approach. So we'll get in intuitively a sense of what he's talking about and how that contradicts, in my view, the Agile at scale approach, which is a little bit different. So he says, since the strength of the chain is determined by the weakest link, the first step to improve an organization must be to identify the weakest link. Okay? So that seems intuitive enough. But when, this is my issue, when I'm in a large organisation, I'm brought in because there's some pain in part of it over here, is that the weakest link? Probably not, statistically speaking. I mean, there's some pain. But the weakest link, you know, in a huge organisation could be here or here or here. And even if I am at the weakest link, other coaches or consultants have been brought in elsewhere. So this is kind of interesting. So I had a bit of a crisis of confidence about this. Has anyone else had this crisis of confidence? Yeah, Tony. Tony has. Yeah. Oh, I'm going to resolve it tonight. So, you know, I sort of had a semi-intuitive way of going, look, I probably am doing some good. You know, this is why I say it's a kind of existential crisis, because am I making a difference in the big wide world? And it kind of links up. It's not as bad as that. You know, I didn't get depressed or anything. I was still being paid. That was one answer. There's a few different approaches, and we're going to explore them now. Okay. But I really want to try and help you build your intuition, because a lot of your intuition about this stuff is actually very good. We're going to look at sports. I could do it in terms of jazz or other kind of collaborative activities. But let's do a bit more overt interaction. So let's say you come in, maybe this was this morning, maybe you had a great day. You came in this morning, you had a really good day, you knocked off what you intended to do or a reasonable amount of work by lunchtime. What do you do in the afternoon? Do you do more work? Okay, because there's usually more work to do. Go to the beach. Now, I gave this talk in Canberra for the first time, and I didn't really think too hard about it, so I had to sort of say, go to the lake, you know. Which isn't quite as inspiring to me. Help others, and that could be asking your boss or your colleagues who need some help. Learn something new, or maybe you've got some kind of side project which will change the world. So, can I have a show of hands, please? Who would do A?
Which day of the week?
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
B? No one's going to the beach. C? Help others. Good. D? Learn something new. Okay. And E? Change the world. Yeah, well, look, there's a bit of grandiosity involved in that. Yeah, so what I want to do is persuade you that today that A is kind of, it's not necessarily the wrong thing to do, but it shouldn't be what you jump to. And we've had a much more even spread today, so I'm encouraged by that. That you don't want to go to the beach. I guess it wasn't such a nice day for the beach, but we'll get back to the going to the beach aspect. So let's turn to my intellectual hero. A long time ago, I did my PhD in black holes, which incidentally Einstein did not believe in, although his theory predicted. So let's take a leaf out of his book. In 1905, because he was deemed too creative, as a young man, too creative to work in science, he hadn't finished his PhD at that stage. In the mornings, he worked as a patent clerk, and he did his technical work, reading and approving or making recommendations on technical patents. And in the afternoon, he finished off his doctorate, which, having known some friends who polished off master's degrees while doing full-time work, I find that impressive already. But what's absolutely stunning is that he wrote 4 revolutionary scientific papers, which, this is a digression, but, you know, it's good. So I'm not quite sure about the exact order, but yeah, we'll get to that. That's sort of the culmination. I think any of them could have won the Nobel Prize. The first one was on the photoelectric effect. So he demonstrated that that light, which was thought of as a wave, also had a particle nature. Okay, so kind of related to quantum mechanics. Number 2, yeah, so not kind of related, helped continue quantum mechanics. 2, solved the mystery of Brownian motion, which showed that atoms existed. Until then, they'd been a theoretical concept. Number 3 was special relativity, for which he's perhaps best known. And number 4, a little thing which, when restated, was a continuation on special relativity with the equation you would have heard of, E equals mc squared. Not bad for in the afternoon. Now, notably, what he didn't do was more patent work. He didn't pull from the patent backlog, and I think we should all be grateful for that. We'll get to the beach later. Okay, so now to help you with the intuition. So, For me, the smallest team I can think of has 2 people. One person maybe if you've got some multiple personalities. I shouldn't say that. Right. So let's say we put you in a you're in a canoe with me, and I'm not very good. You're a faster paddler, and you're on the right paddling, and I'm on the left. So you can paddle faster than me, should you? Why not? Because you'll go around in circles. Now, implicitly, we have a goal, which is to go in a straight line quite fast. There's more sophisticated things we could do. But yeah, you can put that effort in, but it will actually detract from the effect. Now, a similar metaphor for this that might land with some people is, say you're in a jazz band and you can play the trumpet really, really fast, which would be great if everyone could keep up with you, but they can't. Should you play the trumpet at No, it doesn't work because you're out of sync. The rhythm and the coordination and collaboration is important, not being the fastest monkey on the block or canoeist in the canoe. So what could you do instead? Which is more constructive than going in circles by.
Coach, encourage.
Coach, encourage? Great, yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Slow down.
Slow down. Well, yeah. For that would be step 1. Slow down. Coach, encourage. You could maybe occasionally paddle on the other side to help out. In the longer term, the coaching could amount to them actually improving. But the constraint, the weakest link, that's me, the slow paddler. Okay. So let me make it clear how I think this is a model, a simple model for organizations. Okay. Now, at larger scale, there would be more people, it would be more like a bathtub. There'd be more people, we'd all have blindfolds on. So what does the blindfold signify? The blindfold signifies, unlike in the canoe where everyone is aligned and can see where they're going, here we're somewhat reduced in our ability to understand what the other person or the other department is doing. So we can be unwittingly going a lot faster and it's sending us around in circles, metaphorically. Make sense? So it's actually important to be able to see where you're going and how the others are doing. It's incredibly important, and yet when we have structures like traditional KPIs saying boost local output, work as hard as you can, don't go to the beach, that's not necessarily giving us the coordination. Now, if you're applying good techniques like Agile and Lean, a lot of that is about seeing what's going on in your local area. The problem with scaling is if the organization is huge, it's hard to see everything. And it's too much to take in as well. That's the challenge. Okay. So let's look at the theory of constraints versus Agile or Lean at scale. Okay, so this is another view of the 2 people in a canoe, explained in a way which makes sense in terms of value streams. So this is a very simplified view of the theory of constraints, that we've got some kind, you can understand it in manufacturing or any kind of process terms. I think in one of the drafts of my paper on this, I situated in the kitchen making schnitzels, where you'd start with a, apologies to any vegans or vegetarians, you'd start with a piece of veal or chicken, and then you'd have someone at the next station putting on flour, then coating it in egg, then breadcrumbs, then frying. And one point of those, maybe frying is the slow point, because it takes a while to cook the chicken. That's like the pinch point. So if Michelle is she's fantastic at her stage of putting egg on it, but all that's going to happen is we're just going to build up inventory because we've got this pinch point. So the lesson of the theory of constraints is that in any value stream, you can improve wherever you like, but it's only at the constraint or the global bottleneck which will influence the overall throughput of the system, which gives you the bottom line results you're after. And in fact, you may be making things worse because there's a carrying cost for all that inventory being stacked up elsewhere. So it's all about getting a nice flow, kind of like the nice rhythm that we had in the canoe or everyone in time in the jazz band. So that's cool. If you can see the system, and at scale, that's difficult. But for a patch of it, we can see it. So, here we've got another one of those reinforcing loops. There's some instructions. Find that constraint, find the bottleneck, exploit it. That means, exploit and subordinate means, look, if people who are contributing to, say, the frying in my schnitzel manufacturing, if they've got other duties, take them away, bring in a second fry pan, etc., until it's no longer the constraint. Make improvements, and then it'll move somewhere else. Maybe now the egg is where we're constrained. And so by continuing to do this sense-making activity, we hop from constraint to constraint, and we get better and better, and we open out that pipe. One of the nice things about this is that it's kind of hypothesis-driven. If I think that the bottleneck is there, then we make some improvements there according to the recipe, and if the global flow doesn't improve, I was wrong. Okay, that we've learned something. But if I was right, we'll see it improve until it's no longer the constraint. So theoretically, it's nice if you can see the whole system. It's a really powerful approach. So you get this rapid compounding improvement if you can pull it off. But there are some limitations at scale. I've got no quibbles with it at smaller, and by its scale I mean so big you can't see the whole system. So imagine a case where we're in a giant organization and you tried to apply this. What you're effectively saying is, okay, somehow we've figured out that the bottleneck is here, the constraint is here. Everyone else, don't do improvement because it's a waste. Okay? Unless you can go and help with them. It might be years before you get over to here. Well, that's no good because the people who have a desire to improve, they're going to leave because it's got that chilling effect. There's a bit of a simplification there because there may be multiple value streams through the organization. I'm just smoothing over that for simplicity. So one huge pro, we want that big improvement so that our organization can prosper, but we've got some practical problems. Okay. Now, Agile and Lean, and I'm just simplifying this, they tend to work at smaller scale. So one response to this is try and get a much bigger, make a small really big, like Toyota production system. So it's the whole factory is kind of a visible system. That's valid. But there's always limits to how much you can do that. But typically what we do in Agile, whether in software development or elsewhere, is assemble these small cross-functional teams. If we take a lean Kanban approach, what we do is we try and really understand our little system and we improve. We get the local improvement. We're all rowing in time. It's great. But we're part of a bigger picture. How do we coordinate? So most of the approaches to scaling Agile, I've taken Scrum at Scale, which is a new one, safe, less, can consider them all fairly interchangeable. They have some kind of mechanism by where you bubble up improvements, communicate to another level. So in this picture, which is kind of pretty and fractal, like self-similar, these represent teams of maybe 3 to 7 people who are each self-improving, and then they get together in a so-called scrum of scrums, and then you've got the scrum of scrums and so forth. Okay, so what could be wrong with that approach?
A lot of meetings?
A lot of meetings, yeah, true. It could be very short, yeah.
Yeah, true.
How do we know that the improvement is being directed to the global bottleneck? It feels a bit like boiling the ocean. Now, I think it's kind of in the right direction. So, but is it directed and are we getting enough improvement happening, or are they interfering with each other? Are they rowing in different directions? So it's humane, it's great, we get improvement, we get engagement, everyone gets to help out. And locally you can see the difference. Those who said, I'll go and help someone else, great answer. And easy if you can see who needs help. Right? Oh, I finished early, but these people are drowning, right? Let's go help them. Great impulse. And it's kind of scalable. You don't need to have this God's eye view to know where the bottleneck is, because you just try in your local area and then you go up to the next level and maybe they can see what's going on. That's kind of the right idea. But what I am seeing is there's insufficient focus on the global bottleneck, which was that lesson of theory of constraints. Doesn't necessarily, I think it's close but not close enough. So improvements in one place often interfere elsewhere. I think intuitively a lot of good consultants, what they do is something like what I used to do, which is you've got this remit and you're making improvements within your sphere of influence, and then as you make it more efficient, you're also looking at what's happening in your neighbourhood. Am I making your job harder? Right? And in that case, I'll go, well, let's have a conversation. If what I'm doing is improving for me, but it's sending you off, well, then maybe I'll stop doing that and I extend my sphere of influence and try and cooperate so that I'm hopefully not bashing into others. So that's sort of the intuitively right thing to do, but we can sharpen it up a bit. What we really want to do is to have our cake and eat it too. We want the focused and efficient improvement along the lines of the theory of constraints, opening up, finding out where that global bottleneck is and fixing it. But we don't want to have to do it from the God's eye view and say, everyone else stop while we focus here in large systems. Okay. So, it happened to me again. You see, part of what triggered this for me was I started a new consulting gig and I was working with a group and there was a lot of pain. It was an area, I'm going, you're in a lot of pain, I can help you, but I was thinking about this again and I was wondering, is this the biggest bottleneck? Could it be that by improving here I'll do damage elsewhere? So I went, can someone show me a big picture of the system? And where, maybe there was one. It was too big, so there wasn't. And I did get to see a value stream, which is one thing, but it didn't actually have the bit that I was working on. So it wasn't quite big enough. So I was back to square one. And then I had this thought. So let's go back to the beach. Does anyone recognise this beach? Mornington, close. Mornington Peninsula. Sorrento Back Beach. The rock pools there. Highly recommended. That's where I used to go growing up and get to when I can. So this is my thought experiment. So say you've got a team. Say you've got a team who, for the sake of argument, aren't working at the global bottleneck, and they're very steady. They get through 5 days of work every 5 days. But then someone has an insight and they get an efficiency improvement. So this week they got through their normal amount of work in 4 days. And on the 5th day they went to the beach. So my question to you is, thinking theory of constraints for the moment, what effect does this have on the overall system?
Less inventory backed up.
Less inventory backed up? Well, you're less inventory than if they continued to work, yeah. But they didn't continue to work. So
throughput-wise, it has no effect.
Throughput-wise, it has no effect. So it has not damaged the system throughput-wise.
Yes.
Yes, that's correct. And this was one of the things that Goldratt said. He said, don't make improvements elsewhere because you might be damaging throughput by interference effects. And so this thought experiment shows us that not necessarily. You could just go to the beach, which no one chose, I might add. And I'm not saying this is the optimal thing to do, but this is a way of not damaging the system in terms of throughput in the face of improvement which wasn't at the global bottleneck. What about in terms of the team morale? what does it do? Goes up. No one chose to go to the beach, but yeah, it goes up, right? And they didn't have to go to the beach, but it was important that they didn't back up inventory, as we said. So if we include humans in the picture, rather than just cogs in the machine, we've got a metric going up, which is their satisfaction, and we haven't damaged throughput. Now, really, we want both, don't we?
But only locally we've improved the morale.
We've only locally
It
moved.
could actually damage morale of other people.
It could, and there could be a witch hunt.
Yeah.
Right, and this is where, you know, this is a bit of theory, right? The psychological aspects are very, very real, and that is a totally valid point. But let's just get through the theory first, and then let's get into that in the discussion, because I think it's critical. Okay, so yes, morale increases locally, and global output is unchanged. If you're worried about lumpiness, they could have smoothed it out so they go home early each day. Take it as you will. So let's just sit with that. So let's say it's not just one team which is doing this, it's all the teams in the organisation are making improvements. They're not yet necessarily going to the beach, but they're not jumping to do extra work because they don't want to damage things. So at this point, we've got global morale going up, at least a bit, until they get bored. And we'll look at some other options. But we haven't made things worse or better. It's just the same. So now we're going to try and do a bit better than that. So can you imagine how thrilled I was when I found a picture of Einstein at the beach? Interestingly, and totally irrelevant for this talk, wearing ladies' sandals, but it was a different time and place. For fans of the minimalist opera called Einstein on the Beach, I'm assuming that this was the inspiration. That's also irrelevant to this talk, but there you go. What a great photo. So I'm Praga. This is the grandiose bit. After you make an improvement, the last thing you should do is more work. That's sort of jumping to the conclusion. If you're at some kind of bottleneck, not necessarily even the global, we might delve into that, but certainly if you're at the global bottleneck, then sure, by all means do more work. That will help. So my point is that it's really great to make improvement, but then you've got to do this sense-making and collaboration to find out what to do with the improvement dividend or free time that you've spared up to avoid stuffing up the system. So let's look at some of these intelligent purposes. Look, about the stupidest thing you could do is like, and this has been suggested and clearly it happens, is you could fire the team after they've made the improvement. Oh, we don't need you. We can get right now. You know, that's just marvelous. I think in terms of the chilling. Being rather sarcastic here, the chilling effect of hoping for any further suggestions for improvement from anyone ever again. But you know, I sort of understand where that thinking comes from. So instead of doing that, celebrate. So you know, maybe go to the beach first time, or at least have a beer. So this is where I emphasize Praga rhymes with lager, so it's not Praga's long. Reserve capacity for more learning and improvement, like we did at the beginning. We want to keep the virtuous cycle going. Contribute, help others, so you could share insights and learnings. Remember, in the canoe, the better canoeist, the better paddler could help me to learn. That's going to help because I was the global, or I was the bottleneck there. Take some work away from the next level bottleneck. Okay, so in the canoe, have a bit of a paddle on the other side to help the other person out. Only do more of your usual work if you are slowing others down, if it makes sense. So maybe there's a bit of a leap here, but the idea about scaling improvement is it's not enough to just make an improvement and have local output. That might actually be counterproductive. It is good to free up some time and capacity, because then you can go and help others, share learnings. And this is what I mean about the next level bottleneck. Maybe it's too big a system for me to see the global bottleneck. but I should be able to collaborate with people the next level up and say, well, where's your worst bottleneck? How can we drive some of this spare capacity we've freed up to where your biggest pain is? And if everyone's doing that and they're also pushing stuff up, then eventually we're going to drive capacity to that global bottleneck, which is what we need, without having to have that God's eye view necessarily. That's what I think anyway. So, I don't have a catchy name. If you want to get any improvement, you need to have some slack in the system. You can't just be delivering the whole time. It doesn't have to mean that we stop the world and improve, but like if you can, think of something like Google used to have their 20% time, where should that needle be? At one extreme, you've got just working harder, not smarter. At the other end, you've got like a research division. If you're delivering, and this is kind of the lesson of, a great lesson from Lean, of automation with a human touch, always looking for how can we improve a bit. If you're just too busy delivering, maybe there are times you have to do that, but if that's all the time, then you're just working as cogs in the machine. You're not making a system that can see itself and improve. So we need some slack. Then we improve, but we don't jump to doing more work. If you're a leader and you're setting KPIs, please don't encourage that behaviour. And instead contribute or collaborate, figure out how you can help, get a bit more vision of where improvement is at, where more capacity is actually needed, and help out there. So it solved this insight, insofar as I believed it, solved my existential crisis, which is that I don't need to actually see the whole system to know that I'm making a difference. I can start where I am. I can help people who are overworked and do it in such a way that first they bring, if they're overworked, then we bring it under control so they're not going to burn out, and then we start to free up more capacity, and then we raise our eyes and try and help and coordinate. Of course, if you're higher up, then you can set policy, lead by example, and spread the message. And what's really cute about this from a conceptual point of view is normally multifactorial optimization, this is going back to my maths roots, is really hard because we end up saying, well, what's our objective function? How do we blend everything together? What happens in this case is we go, well, actually, the single objective of improving the whole system from the outside, we can't just mindlessly do that. There's got to be some breathing space. Sometimes we find that we can't really directly contribute, but we can help with other goals, with people's happiness, with their engagement and development, which brings us back to the psychological dimensions. And then there can be this reciprocation. So bottom line is to stop focusing on lifting local output, but keep on improving. Work smarter, not harder. It's like the cliche again. But then the contribution at the next level, understanding how you fit with the other parts of the system, is super important. And the final thought is that there's always a bigger system. Even if you're very senior in an organisation, and look, it's hard to see this at times, but we have had tremendous improvements over the last few thousand years in productivity, from being subsistent to now, at least in the wealthy West, freeing up a lot of extra capacity, maybe not evenly distributed. Some of us, I'm sure, still feel overworked, but there is this larger system, and I think you can apply this not just in organisations but in your own lives, and then that frees up capacity which you can use either to help your organisation, to further your own development, to contribute other ones, or eventually to go to the beach. Thank you. So, I would love, yeah, I don't, how much time do we have for questions and discussions? Because
A lot of time.
I'm here all night, but, well, no.
As long as you're ready.
Until people get, but let's have a bit of discussion. Yeah.
Questions?
Yeah.
Could you go back to the Scrum slide? By the way, it was a brilliant talk.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I actually had a bit of an insight from it. I was thinking, so you're talking about the global constraint.
Yep.
So one of the things we're doing when we scale Agile, if you like, we're trying to get the benefits of Agile at scale, is we're trying to actually generate value streams across the organization. So what we're actually, so each of those value streams is autonomous and independent. You could almost look at them as their own system if you've got the right people in each of those value streams.
Yes.
You could actually argue that these kind of scaled frameworks are distributing the global constraint across the company such that there isn't one global constraint. There's only a constraint within each value stream, in which case the continuous improvement within that Scrum team is actually going to cause throughput to go up because you're delivering value to customers.
Yeah, if you can, I'm not sure that I've got your point completely, but absolutely. Where I talk about the whole system, it's really per value stream. So if you can, this is where I think people talk about descaling. If you can descale so that you have a number of value streams and you can see, if you know who your end customer is, that's really helpful in aligning, like seeing where you're going in your canoe.
The first thing you do, and if you're trying to turn them lean, is you do a value stream mapping exercise.
Yes.
So what are our value streams?
Yes.
Because by doing that, you're actually distributing that global constraint into separate areas, so that they do have control over the constraint, and they can improve their own local place. Yeah.
Totally valid.
Yeah.
Does anyone work in a big enough organization where you can't actually do that?
Well, that was my point I was going to raise, is that's good in theory. As you get into large organizations, I find it harder to that.
Well, in practice, the value streams aren't true value streams, and you don't actually have people like salespeople working within just that one value stream. Exactly. So it's theoretical, but if you can achieve it, then.
And for example, and a real life example of that, I didn't work there, but I certainly we recruited people from REA, realestate.com, who initially they started doing Agile in software, and then they brought in the operations folk and then the marketing folks, and then they realigned the organization to have commercial property, which was one value stream, and residential, which was another, and they had some other one which I forget. And that took over a period of years they were able to do that. They're doing pretty well.
Yeah. But ironically, I've seen businesses that are aligned around kind of business units.
Yes.
Actually doing an Agile transformation and going the opposite way and say, well, we need to collaborate more across our business units. And so they actually destroy what they had, which was a beneficial thing. And then you're distributing that constraint.
And isn't it interesting, because then you get into where's the cultism in terms of why are we doing particular actions, and is it helping something? And I think that's where a way that this can be tightened up, and it was pointed out to me, was that part of the theory of constraints, that global view, flow accounting, there's only three things that matter. One is the total sales / profits, one is the inventory, and the other one is operating expense. Right? And you want the first one to go up and the other two to come down. And so if I try and formalize this further, I think we need to add some metrics around innovation and morale and so forth, because my claim is that you can do improvement and drive up those metrics quite quickly locally, but what we want to do is, for the bottom line metrics, we want them to head in the right direction over time. And also there's an ethical thing where we can't just make the one group, drive them into the dust, because that's unfair. We should go and help them, so forth.
And if you hired all systems thinkers, right?
Yeah.
Everyone in the organisation is going to understand that they're part of that broader system, right?
Yeah, another great point. So one thing I like about this kind of thing is we should be paying attention to which groups are able to generate improvement, because the people who are good at systems thinking in practice and they're able to blend that delivery and improvement, guess who we should be promoting, or at least giving them more responsibility. So I think it tucks into that.
Yes, one more thing, like Scrum of Scrums will definitely help to improvise. I agree with you. Unless the teams, all these Scrums, plan it in certain cadence so that they can deliver in the right cycle, so the total output would not improve if it is the only way Scrum of Scrums or Scrum of Scrums, right? Still, there is a constraint. One more thing we have to apply is that to the SAFe talks about the PI planning.
Yeah.
Right? So that we can all deliver in the cadence, right? Everyone aligns, so the rest of the teams also deliver in the same manner, which are contributing to the overall success together.
Well, I think that depends on what your value stream structure is.
Right.
So one of the things in SAFe, which is Scaled Agile Framework, which is another one of these, is that there might be a 2-week or a shorter planning horizon for the teams, and then, sorry, what's your name, sir?
Sharad.
As Sharad says, then might be a 2 or 3 month horizon where they all get together, and as a team of teams, they plan together and then deliver a big piece. And the way that they usually do that is they have this big planning meeting, just as a team might have at the start of their shorter planning horizon, and they look at dependencies. So that if your team is delivering something that my team needs, let's plan that piece in before mine. But to Neil's point, if you can get rid of those dependencies, because actually there's multiple value streams, then the different teams can go at independent paces, which would be like getting the 2 people in the canoe and chucking them into individual kayaks, and then they've got one who's faster, assuming there's value in them getting there. They can go faster while I toddle along in mine. So yeah, it's it kind of depends on what you're trying to do. Sorry, Tony had his hand up before, so
Well, it's very ill-formed as of yet. No, Neil was saying about the value streams, and they tend to you can generate value streams, and they can generate value independently of the others. But in larger organisations, they're quite commonly constrained by the overall governance framework that you have.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that governance framework is quite often, it doesn't actually see the problems it's causing.
Yeah.
And when you look across different value streams or across different groups, for example, each of the 5 scrums you have there,
yep,
they can't see the impacts of a governance framework across multiple scrums of scrums and what impacts that has. So you were talking earlier about saying, well, you can look up and you can see what's happening around you without actually seeing the big picture.
Yep.
God's view of
yep,
everything. So you can't see the bottleneck.
Yes.
Whereas a lot of the times the bottleneck is the governance structures that are in place.
Yeah, you need someone to be able to see the bottleneck.
Yeah, well, I guess
someone somewhere. Otherwise, because if it's invisible to everyone, how can we possibly focus on it?
Well, I mean, as you were saying, each individual, let's say scrum of scrums,
yep,
can focus on bottlenecks in its area,
mm-hmm,
and they can look outside and look at bottlenecks that are touching them or nearby.
Yes.
But do you have any ideas on how you can, I guess, promote the visibility of bottlenecks at scale across?
Yeah, so I think
without being able to promote them up, well, it's not so much to promote them up; it's more promote them out.
Yeah,
I think across the different, across so that everyone can kind of see, well, our area is actually really highly optimized.
Yes.
But that area over there, which is like 50 teams,
yep,
10 teams maybe, they're having heaps of trouble, and maybe that's where we.
So one sign of that, and this is I forget who said this first. Maybe Neil remembers. Is that if you do some kind of local improvement, your pain, which may have been internal, will move to the boundaries.
Yeah.
So, my hand-waving answer is at every level, you need people doing some kind of sense making, whether it's value stream mapping, Wardley maps, whatever helps you get insight into what's holding you back, where the opportunities for improvement are. So the people with blindfolds, or the areas with blindfolds, they're not going to be improving because they just don't know what to do.
And they're not rewarded for improving.
Yeah. It might be the reverse. So you know, we need this system thinking at all levels, which is about perception and then being able to translate perception into action. This talk is really about an engine for freeing up capacity to then usefully use it. But if we don't have good vision and guidance systems, then undoubtedly it will be misapplied. Sorry, this gentleman next.
Yeah,
and then,
so the point I was going to make was really uniting that kind of theoretical view with the practical views. One of the things I'm seeing in big orgs is, in SAFE you'd probably call it a strategic theme, right? It might be a major business objective, but a lot of the times across many different teams you'll see that those business objectives might be loud and clear. So if you're looking for something across many different pods to try and unite the improvements they're making, there's always that kind of strategic theme to try and align to. It doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to cause another constraint, but it makes it probably less likely. It gives you somewhere to start.
Yeah, and I think the thing I'm a little bit funny about is it sort of sounds like I put this extreme thing of never increase output anywhere until, you know, until you've got to the global bottleneck, and I think that's probably a bit harsh. But it needs to somehow make its way there. And I think also that you can, and maybe this is to do with the local value stream structure, you can make other kinds of improvements which aren't stacking up in inventory. And the more you can see all the way to the customer, which is the lesson of Lean, and Agile as a descendant of Lean in a sense, you can be pretty confident that you're not doing so much. You're not doing damage. Hopefully people will just shout out when you're saying, hey, you're making life harder for us, and you're going, oh no, I need it for my KPIs. That's the error, right? It's more, okay, let's rearrange my KPIs and see how we can help. So
yeah, I was just going to say that like with Agile, because it's by definition, it's like a self-learning system.
Yeah.
So if you take a really small system and that has a framework in it, has governance in it, has feedback loops, retrospectives, whatever it is. But if it can self-learn, if it can adapt, so you can identify what those constraints are, because there's always constraints. Some are acceptable, some are not acceptable, and some can be improved. And if the system has that learning capability, then when you do scale it, you kind of go through this iteration of, you know, learning, adaptation, et cetera, So there's always constraints. You're just constantly kind of removing them one after the other, aren't you? And as the system scales and gets bigger, then it's just like another iteration of scaling and learning.
Okay. So one thing I get asked for is case studies, and mainly I'm just using this as a sense-making tool retrospectively to explain my own experience, but maybe this will speak to what you've just constructed. When I gave this talk in Canberra, a government executive got up or asked some penetrating questions about what leaders should do. I shared some of them with you. He came up to me afterwards and he said, actually, what's been happening where we've put in Agile teams, right, a bunch of them, is we can see that they're improving by whatever their local metrics are, and yet as a whole system, we weren't getting improvement until we said to the teams that were doing really well, go and help the struggling teams, right, which is one of the good moves, go and help someone else, right, and change their KPIs a bit. And I said, that's really cool. I think you've just found empirically what I theoretically recommending. So yeah, absolutely. If we could self-learn, if the system can self-learn, yes. But what the history of Agile was, and this is a bit different from Lean, was it was like these small groups of software developers going, let's just make our life all right. And at that time, it was common for software development to be the bottleneck.
Yeah.
So it was receptive. But it wasn't thought of as something scalable. Then we learned, this is my version, others will correct me on it, of the history of Agile. We learned that doing stuff at scale is really hard. And like traditional waterfall delivery had a appalling failure rate. So we sort of slapped on a lean layer on top and went, let's waved our hands and talked a bit about value streams to a lesser or greater extent, and confident that we could do stuff well at the team level. Not always true, but often the case. And yeah, my point is that it was like, you could have this improvement cycle. So again, good canoeists improving, but they've got blindfold or partial blindfolds on, so we don't have the coordination. Now, one way this was very apparent was that in the recent years where we've had these scaled agile approaches, what have we seen? Really not too bad training happening down at the coalface where people have the least power, but how good have people been at doing sense-making and teamwork up the organisational scale? Yeah, I'm getting a laugh. Exactly. Not necessarily very good. My argument would be actually we need that real agility or good lean thinking and systems thinking at all levels in this kind of self-similar way.
I guess you don't like just not plan for a change, make a change and then just see what happens. You kind of have some theories, you have some sort of plan, you make a change with some degree of governance, right? So when things don't go right, you can sort of make a slight change and fail gracefully with little impact to value. And so if the system has that kind of inherent sort of architecture where you keep on making changes, like you obviously get a compounding effect as it gets bigger and bigger, but yeah, it should have that inherent.
So the resilience as well as the possibility for explosive growth. Yeah, that's a, yeah.
I was just going to say, building on that though, it needs to be mindful that the systems, the systems are made up of other systems. So you can have a situation where one of the system gets more efficient and starts running faster, and it just results in the other team either downstream from it becoming busier.
Yeah, I mean,
or upstream running out of work.
You have to be reactive to how systems are performing, but then you can also be strategic and say, okay, we want to scale this and integrate this department. And if we do that, what's our plan? What's our governance structure for that? So you put that plan in place and maybe you trial it on a very small scale so that you can kind of make a small change and you can sort of iterate. So building and learning again.
Yeah, and the spin I'd put on that is I'd say, what's my hypothesis? If we make this change, what do I expect to see in a macro measure? Because I wouldn't, look, unless I'm playing a very long game where I'm having to go backwards to go forwards, but often I'll say, I think this will improve things. And yeah, doing the small experiment is to validate that before you then double down. And that's again comes into that, sense-making theory of constraints and so forth. So,
Hi there. Awesome talk. Thank you so much. I'm just wondering, to next level this up, whether you apply a different lens. I have a mental model of this is improving how the system's working. We're not speaking to the value stream, the what and the why. So we're talking output versus outcome. I'm wanting to level up the next level because we can optimize the system all we like. But if we're not optimizing what's going through the system, are we truly understanding the constraint?
Oh, right. Now, I don't necessarily have an answer to this, but I'm really glad you asked the question because, often people talk about what we need to do is effectiveness, not efficiency. And just to reframe what you've said, this is about improving efficiency. Are we more effective? And I think that goes, I
wouldn't agree with that.
No. Okay.
I think you are improving effectiveness, what you're talking about there, because you're talking about throughput, and true throughput is throughput of value, not just some arbitrary output, right? And actually, and this actually leads on to something I was going to mention as well, is that we're talking about improvement at the moment and saying if you're not at the bottleneck, then you shouldn't improve. But actually, it's important to call out that we shouldn't improve our throughput at the bottleneck. Sorry, if we're not at the bottleneck.
Yes.
If we become more efficient at delivering the same amount of value, we have even more capacity to help the surrounding system.
Exactly. Yes.
So the effectiveness is doing more of something of value, and the efficiency is doing the same amount in a shorter time frame.
Yeah.
So you actually, if you're not at the bottleneck, you want to improve operational efficiency.
Yes.
If you are at the bottleneck, you want to improve your effectiveness.
What he said, yeah. You could have the microphone to drop if it wasn't attached to my ears. Beautifully expressed. However, just to level up, and I had a colleague, Ricardo, who's Brazilian, said just to spice things up a bit. And this is my point. I'm actually serious about going to the beach. Because eventually, there was the economist John Maynard Keynes said in 1930, at the height of the Great Depression, just extrapolating productivity trend, that by 2030, which we're almost at, we'd be working a 15-hour week. This is, and he wrote an essay called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. I'm not working a 15-hour week, and you probably aren't. But even without, really, really good compounding improvement, we've been getting improvement over time. It's just not very evenly distributed. We've got the 0.01% or whatever who are living on all our innovations, and we've got an increasing number of unemployed. So we have a distribution problem. I don't have a solution to that. But this kind of thinking only accelerates the trend. Eventually, I think we should all be able to go to the beach for more time, but there's some social problems to get through.
I was just going to say, it's interesting you mentioned that, because there's been a number of studies done now about moving to a 4-day week and finding that productivity is either stayed the same or even increased.
Yeah, and Evan Laybourne, who some of you knew, his theory is that work is getting a lot more dilute. And it's going to pop. There's a fellow who has a thesis, I don't think he calls it that, called Bullshit Jobs, where you go, how many people are is your job actually contributing? I don't know if you feel about that, like that about your own job, but those people, So yeah, it sort of sits well with Evan's idea of that there's a whole lot of dilution that you can, let's just not muck around, let's go 4 days and see what happens.
Thanks for the talk, Dan. I want to circle back to governance bottlenecks. My view is if you're in the value stream, even though governance may be well and truly far away, or compliance or regulation bottlenecks, you know where they are. No, seriously, I've been in the finance industry for a long time, And they're about making people feel safe, whether it's senior management, whether it's government, whether it's an industry body. So you've got to find another way to make them feel safe. And I think that's perhaps not all the time something a team or even a single company can do, but something I think as an industry, as a society, we have to address. Sometimes we do things in a very bureaucratic manner and not needed and not adding value, are they, Neil?
Yeah, I think I'll throw that back to Tony since you...
Thanks.
You were sort of arguing that maybe you can't see or came across as you can't necessarily see those governance bottlenecks.
It's more around, you might be able to see governance bottlenecks, but you don't know globally whether they're the ones that have an impact.
Okay. Oh, well, maybe there's some work to be done in that area.
You can improve, if you can improve all the ones you can see, then overall the system will improve.
At least within your region.
But I guess, the people at the exterior or the farther reaches of what you can see, if they improve and they do the same, it can spread. And
so we seem to be winding down. So thank you. That was fantastic feedback. Where would I like you to take this? Last time I got some responses of this is really exciting or let me process this. And another one was we couldn't even do this bit locally. If you can't get a bit of slack in your system, then you're dead in the water, basically. How can you improve? And that's still very much a cultural norm. If you want to get ahead, work harder, not smarter.
That's how Agile's told, to go down the bottom to improve efficiency so you can save headcount. That's a fact.
That's where you get in trouble.
But again, if we sack people, you get in trouble. And this comes back to the psychological side, which is to say, so what, I guess, so there's a couple of things. So if you are a senior executive and a psychopath, then I hope what you will take away from this talk, and you want to be like richer than Jeff Bezos, what this should be telling you is, yes, you can have the compounding improvement you need, but you can't treat people as cogs in the machine. You need them to help to bring your system to life. Okay? If you're not, on the off chance that you're not the head of an organisation and or a psychopath, then this is my, which I hope is the more common case, then you can start where you are and use this knowledge to build your influence and do good with people around you and contribute. So over to you. Thanks.